The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of dust and bone beneath a sun that seemed to hang from the sky like a judgment. The wind moved like a whisper of the dead, restless, dry, and ancient. Buzzards circled overhead, painting shadows across the cracked ground, while the distant clatter of hooves echoed like a memory too stubborn. A lone wagon creaked across the horizon, drawn by a tired mule and a man with a face carved by hate and whiskey. In the back, chained to a rail like forgotten freight, sat Clara Mae, no more than 16, slight as a twig and silent as the grave. Her eyes, though, held stories. Not fear, not even sadness, just wait. She could not speak. She walked with a limp so visible it invited mockery. And yet, something about her made even the hardened barkeepers glance twice before sneering. Because sometimes, when the sun hit her just right, you could almost see the fire inside her chest flickering to life. She had been sold that morning, traded for a sack of grain and a bottle of rye to a man named Harlan Finch, one of the last true tyrants of the Nevada basin. Finch didn't want her for company. He wanted silence. He wanted someone no one would listen to, no one would miss. But what Harlan didn't know, what no one in that desert hole yet realized, was that Clara Mae was about to shift the ground beneath their feet. Not with a gun, not with a scream, but with something far more dangerous in the Old West, a mind they couldn't chain. She sat in the dust that night, wrists still sore from the iron shackle. Quotes howled in the distance, but Clara listened to a different song, one that lived only in her memory. Her mother's lullaby, a language of signs and symbols passed in secret. Before the fever took her, before the silence set in, beneath her tattered dress, she clutched a folded page hidden in the hem, words she could read, drawn by her mother's hand. A map? A warning? A secret meant for someone else? That was the first spark, the first echo of something larger than herself. And when the old stable hand slipped a rusted key into her palm later that night, without a word, without a reason, Clara Mae knew someone believed in her, even if the world didn't. The West had always been a place for men with guns, women with grit, and legends forged in fire. But this time, the story would begin with a girl who couldn't speak, and end with a truth that would burn through every lie the West ever told. The mind is the last frontier, and hers was already halfway to revolution. The sun had long dipped beneath the teeth of the mesas, but Clara Mae didn't sleep. She never really did, not in the barn, not on the trail, and especially not under the roof of Harlan Finch. Sleep belonged to the safe. Clara only had silence and memory. She sat on the hay-covered floor, curled beneath the weight of her thoughts, her fingers running across the edges of the want paper hidden in her dress. It wasn't just a drawing, not anymore. It was a message, maybe even a mission. But what kind of mission could a broken girl carry out? A girl who couldn't speak her name. A girl with a limp so heavy it slowed her breath. She closed her eyes. The desert wind pushed against the boards of the barn like a whisper trying to become a scream. She remembered the fire, not the one that burned buildings, but the one that took her voice. She was 10 when raiders came for their homestead. Her mother had hidden her beneath the floorboard, signing one final word with her hands: live. Clara watched from the shadows as the men laughed and drank, setting the house ablaze with her mother still inside. The heat took her breath, the smoke stole her scream, and when dawn came, and the only thing left was ash and the outline of her mother's body, Clara walked, limping, alone, silent. Ever since that day, she believed she was only half a person. Broken body, silent mouth, forgotten soul. Now, in the flickering barn light, her chest ached with something deeper than pain doubt. What was she even doing? That old stable hand gave her a key. Yes, but to what? An escape? A trap? Or just a cruel joke? Maybe the world was exactly what it appeared to be. Ruthless, loveless, and too far gone to care. She pressed her head against her knees and tried to remember her mother's face. But even that was slipping. All she had left were fragments, her hands signing in the dark, her voice humming softly in the mornings. Her strength. Was she strong like that? No, she was just surviving. There's a difference. Clara had grown skilled in silence, learned how to read lips, how to vanish in plain sight. She could hear a lie faster than most could speak it. But all that still left her trapped, owned by a man who saw her as less than cattle. She wanted to run. She thought of slipping out with a key that very night. But then what? A girl alone in the Nevada wilds? No food, no map, no allies. Just a drawing she didn't understand and legs that betrayed her when she needed them most. The temptation to give up was real. The kind that curled into her ribs and whispered cruel logic. Stay, obey, survive. That's all you're made for. But just as the fear crept in deepest, a spark flickered back. She remembered a moment, a small one from years ago. It was winter. Her mother had been sick. Clara had signed, "Will you die?" Her mother had smiled, and in trembling hands, signed back, Only when I have nothing left to fight for, that stayed with her. Clara still had something to fight for. She didn't know what it was yet. Maybe justice, maybe truth, maybe just her own damn name carved into something solid. Something that would last longer than a man's leash. She unfolded the page again, this time with new eyes. There at the edge of the drawing was a symbol she hadn't seen before. A mark burned into the corner. Her mother's mark. Clara didn't know what it meant. But she knew this much. Her mother hadn't drawn this map for nothing. And Clara Mae hadn't survived hell just to die in someone else's cage. She rose, slowly, painfully. Each step toward the barn door felt like dragging a boulder through blood. Her legs screamed, her back begged. But her mind was sharpening. This wasn't just about escape anymore. This was about becoming. In the dead of night, as the barn creaked and the coyotes sang, Clara slipped the key into the lock on the supply chest by the tack wall. It clicked. Inside, old letters, an ivory-handled pistol, a silver pendant shaped like the symbol on her mother's page. Proof something was hidden, something people had killed to bury. And now Clara Mae mute, limping. Underestimated Clara had the first piece. She wasn't ready. She was terrified. But she also wasn't stopping. Sometimes the strongest storms live inside the quietest souls. And in a world built for brutality, there was no greater threat than a girl who could not be broken. Because she'd already been broken once and survived. In the West, secrets didn't stay buried. They festered beneath boots and bullets, waiting for the right mind to uncover them. The morning came slowly, bleeding over the mountains like a warning. Clara Mae crouched beneath the barn's rafters, staring at the objects she'd stolen from the locked chest the night before. The silver pendant still glinted with a quiet defiance, and the letters weathered and brittle carried a name she hadn't heard in years. Elias Whitlow. That name hit her like a stone to the ribs. Elias had ridden with her mother once before the raids, before the fire. A former Pinkerton, some said. A ghost hunter. Others whispered. But most folks didn't speak his name at all anymore. Not after what happened in Hollow Creek, 15 years back. Clara didn't know the whole story. No one did. But whatever had happened out there, it had ended with blood, and somehow her mother had been part of it. That same morning, down in the town of Briar's Edge, 3 riders thundered in through the canyon pass. Dust cloaked their arrival like smoke from a burning church. Their leader, Boone Mercer, dismounted first. Boone was the kind of man who smiled like a wolf before the kill. Ex-Confederate, professional tracker, killer of men, women, and anything in between if the price was right. Word was, he'd been hired by a syndicate out of St. Louis. Men who dealt in old secrets, land deeds, blood rights, railroad routes too dangerous to file through legal channels. He had come west for one reason, to find the girl who had Elias Whitlow's pendant. Clara didn't yet know she was being hunted, but she felt it. As the ranch stirred to life and Harlan Finch barked orders at his men, Clara kept her head low, her eyes sharp. She moved through the stables like a shadow, observing, listening. That afternoon, while pretending to sweep, she caught part of a hushed conversation between Finch and a stranger in a brown coat. She don't speak, but she sees everything, the stranger muttered. You sure she don't know? Finch spat. She's just a half-broke mute with a limp. Hell, if she knew what that pendant was, she wouldn't be alive. Clara's breath hitched. They did know about the pendant, but how? And what exactly was it? That night, she unfolded the map again under lantern light. It wasn't just a map, it was a layered cipher. Hidden lines under the main ink, curves edged so faintly they nearly disappeared. The pendant's shape matched a marking near Hollow Creek, and beneath it, scrawled in her mother's trembling hand, a single word. Divide. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but something about it burned. Divide. A town. A mine. A decision. The next day, Clara's world cracked wide open. A man came to the ranch under the guise of buying horses tall, weathered, with eyes that had seen the Civil War and refused to blink since. He wasn't from around there, and he wasn't interested in horses. Before he left, he dropped something into Clara's feed bucket when no one was looking. A folded card. She opened it in the tack room. It read, Hollow Creek, 2 days, come alone. Burn this. No name, no return. But the mark on the back matched the symbol on her mother's map. And just like that, the mystery she carried grew teeth. Meanwhile, Boone Mercer and his men reached Briar's Edge Saloon. The bartender didn't even ask what they wanted. He just nodded toward the wanted board. There, pinned with a rusted nail, was a page that had recently been torn away. Boone chuckled. Girl thinks she's clever, he murmured. A Whitlow always thinks that. He turned to his men. She's got 3 things I want. The map, the pendant, and her mother's truth. We find her, we get all 3. And maybe then the syndicate gets what it's been looking for since Hollow Creek fell off the map. His eyes darkened. If she don't give it willingly, we take it from her bones. That night, Clara stood outside the barn, looking up at the stars. Her mother used to say the sky in the west was different closer somehow, as if the past still lived in its pattern. She wanted to run. She could take the map, the pendant, and vanish into the desert before Boone's men even got close. But something stronger than fear held her in place. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her mother, about Elias Whitlow, about a secret that someone had burned half the West to erase. And Clara Mae, mute, broken, underestimated Clara was the last thread in the story. She looked down at her hands, scarred, calloused, swore, but they were hers, and they still worked. She signed a word into the dark. Fight. There are things in the West that time tried to bury, maps that led to more than gold, names that carry weight long after they're gone. But every so often, someone comes along who won't let them stay buried. Not for glory, not for revenge, but because the truth once uncovered can never be silenced again. And in 2 days, Clara Mae would walk straight into Hollow Creek and into the story her mother died to protect. She had no voice, no allies, no plan, but she had a choice. And that was more than most. The wind howled through Hollow Creek like a ghost trying to forget its own name. What once was a mining town now stood as a scar carved into the land, abandoned, charred, and half swallowed by sand. Buildings leaned like drunkards who'd seen too much. Signs hung by rusted chains. A church bell, long silent, creaked above it all like a warning that refused to die. Clara Mae stood at the edge of the ruins, cloak pulled tight around her frame, the map in one hand and the pendant against her chest. Her limp was worse now. The long walk from Finch's ranch had cost her blood and breath, but she hadn't stopped. Because this was it, the place her mother had marked. The place where everything had gone quiet. 2 days earlier, Clara had made her decision. Finch was asleep, the guards drunk, the stable hand the same one who had given her the key had pressed a bundle into her hand, bread, water, and a revolver with only 2 bullets. Don't come back, he'd whispered, and don't stop running until you figure out why you were meant to survive. She had nodded, blinking back tears. That night, as she slipped past the fence and into the wild, something inside her shifted, not like a scream, but like a page turning. She wasn't just escaping, she was answering something old, something waiting. Now, at Hollow Creek, the silence was different. It wasn't absence, it was present. Like the town itself remembered. Clara limped through the ruins, reading the structures like symbols. The saloon had collapsed. The old sheriff's station still stood, though barely. But it was the mine shaft at the edge of town that called to her. That's where the map led, and that's where the truth had been buried. As she reached the mine entrance, she heard it. Voices. She dropped behind a boulder, breath frozen in her throat. Spread out. She's here, Boone Mercer. His voice was loud now, serious. No arrogant, just calculation. He knew this wasn't a normal bounty, and that made him dangerous. Check the shaft. If she has the pendant, we take it. If she fights, put her down. Clara closed her eyes. Panic swelled in her chest like rising water. She couldn't outrun them, couldn't outshoot them. And yet, she didn't move, because another voice stirred beneath her fear. Her own. Not the voice she'd lost to fire, the one she'd built in silence. She remembered the nights drawing maps in dirt with her mother. The look in her mother's eyes, not pity, not fear, pride. Her mother had believed in her enough to pass down this truth. Now Clara had to decide, live in hiding forever, or become what her mother saw. She rose from behind the rock, eyes sharp. They were coming. She ducked into the mine shaft, lantern in hand. The pendant, when held to the map, had revealed a second tunnel. One collapsed in 1860, but the map showed a crawl space through the rocks. She followed it, crawled, pulled, bled. Every limb screamed, every step echoed with Boone's footsteps behind her. But she pushed on because forward was the only way out. At the end of the tunnel, she found it, a wooden chest, half buried in dirt and ash. Inside, a book, a journal, a sealed envelope marked with Elias Whitlow's crest, and a U.S. Marshal badge burned at the edge. Clara opened the journal, hands trembling. Pages of testimony, names, places, secrets, records of corruption buried by men in power, rail barons, judges, Pinkertons. Her mother had helped gather this. It was evidence meant to expose an empire, but it had cost lives. Her mother's, Elias's, dozens more. And now it was in Clara's hands. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Boone Mercer stood at the edge of the chamber, gun drawn. Took you long enough, he said. You got your mother's look. That same damn defiance. Clara didn't flinch. Give me the book. Now. She raised her hand not in surrender, but to her chest. She touched the pendant, then slowly pulled it off and tossed it aside. A distraction. Boone followed its path for just a heartbeat and Clara fired. The revolver kicked back so hard it nearly tore her wrist. The bullet grazed his shoulder enough to drop him. She limped forward, fire in her veins, eyes burning. "You think you're the first to call me weak," she signed with shaking hands. "But you'll be the last," Boone growled, lunging, but she slammed the lantern at his feet, fire spilling across the shaft. The flames surged, smoke rose, and Clara turned and ran not from fear, but from triumph. She had faced him, fought back, and she was still standing. Outside, the sun was rising, red, relentless. Clara emerged from the mine, clothes scorched, skin bleeding, the journal clutched to her chest. She collapsed beside the old well, tears falling freely, but not from grief, from release. She had done it. She had survived again, but this time, on her own terms. She looked to the east, toward Briar's Edge, toward Finch, toward the syndicate that wanted this truth buried, and she knew her journey wasn't over. It had just begun. Sometimes the greatest strength is born not in power, but in pain. Clara Mae didn't just walk through fire, she became it. And in a world where men with guns ruled the West, a silent girl with a secret would become the storm they never saw coming. You can bury a voice, you can break a body, but a mind once awakened cannot be silenced. The sun hung like a burning coin in the sky-high noon in Briar's Edge. Dust swirled in the silence that preceded violence. The town square, usually home to cattle drives and drunken dice game, now held its breath. At the edge of the saloon porch stood Boone Mercer, bloodstained from Hollow Creek, but very much alive. His arm was wrapped tight, his pride looser, but his resolve hardened like iron. Beside him, Harlan Finch, red-faced, clutching his rifle like a man cornered by truth. His empire was unraveling, and the last thread was about to snap. And walking down the middle of that quiet, godforsaken street, Clara Mae, limping, alone, her coat flapping in the wind, the marshal's badge pinned to her chest like a dare, and in her hands, the journal, the letters, the truth. Boone narrowed his eyes. "I warned you, girl. I warned you what happened if you came back." She stopped 10 paces away. "No fear, no voice, just presence." "Thought Hollow Creek would bury you," Finch muttered, stepping forward. "Guess you're harder to kill than your mama." Her eyes flinched, but only for a second. Clara dropped the leather-bound journal at her feet, then pulled a second object from her satchel, a sealed envelope addressed to U.S. Marshal Bryant Huxley. She lifted it high for the watching townsfolk to see. Boone's smile vanished. He realized what was happening. "She didn't come back for revenge," he said, low. "She came back to burn it all down." It had all come together. The journal detailed decades of corruption, land theft, railroad fraud, hired killings, names of judges, mayors, and marshals all bought. And now Clara had delivered the evidence directly to the townspeople, not in court, not in secret, in the open, in front of those who'd been trampled for years. Someone in the crowd murmured. Another stepped forward. By the saloon doors, a young deputy touched the hilt of his pistol, but didn't draw. The tide was turning, and Harlan Finch knew it. "You think this ends with papers and stories?" he shouted. "I own this land. I own you all." He raised his rifle, but Clara was faster. She ducked to one knee, drew the revolver the stable hand had given her bang. The bullet struck the rifle's barrel, blasting it from Finch's hands. The old man howled, falling back against the trough. The crowd gasped. She had fired not to kill, but to show control. Then came Boone. He lunged, revolver drawn, screaming as he charged. "You're just a broken girl who don't know when she's lost." Clara didn't run. She didn't even flinch. She waited, just long enough, then stepped sideways, letting Boone's charge carry him into the open right where the townsfolk could see him clearly. Deputy Granger Young, scared, but watching, saw Boone's gun raised to fire. Bang! The deputy pulled the trigger. Boone collapsed in the dust, one hand twitching, then still. Silence. The wind picked up, and slowly, the people began to move. A woman ran to Clara's side. A blacksmith picked up the fallen journal. The town was waking up, not just to truth, but to courage. The kind Clara had ignited. Later that evening, as the sun melted behind the mountains, Clara sat on the porch of the old sheriff's office not as a prisoner, but as a witness. Marshal Huxley himself had ridden in after the deputy's urgent message. He'd read every page, every letter, listened to the townsfolk, saw the fear, the loyalty, the blood, and then he looked at Clara. "You did what most wouldn't." "What most couldn't," she nodded. "And you did it without a voice." She signed one word. Enough. Finch was arrested. The last threads of his empire pulled apart by his own lies. The syndicate exposed. Boone Mercer buried on the outskirts of town, unmarked and forgotten. But Clara Mae, she didn't stay. 2 weeks later, She rode west alone, but never again silent. Word spread of a girl with a limp and no voice who had taken down one of the most corrupt men in the territory. A girl who carried fire in her hands and secret her scars. No one knew where she was headed, but legends say she left copies of the journal in every town she passed, left them in saloons, post offices, churches. Let the truth walk freely where she once could not. In the Old West, there were lawmen, outlaws, and those who simply endured. But Clara Mae was something else entirely. She didn't just survive. She rewrote what it meant to be strong, and though her voice was stolen by fire, her story roared louder than any gun ever fired. Some people ride west to find gold, others to lose themselves. But Clara Mae, she went west to remember who she really was. The desert wind had shifted. Clara Mae sat atop a ridge, the setting sun casting the sky in hues of crimson and amber. The same girl once sold as property now looked out over the vast western horizon, not with fear, but with quiet conviction. She didn't speak. She never would. But somehow, the world had finally learned to listen. Her fingers brushed the earth beneath her. Once, it had felt cold and unforgiving. Now, it felt grounded solid, like she had become. The pain in her leg remained. So did the memory. But she was no longer running from them. Something had changed. She had found her place, not in someone else's home, but within herself. Clara had been marked by silence, but discovered that real power doesn't need a voice. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It chooses again and again to rise, to take one more step, to believe that brokenness isn't the end of a story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a legend. She began as a captive, but became a catalyst. She left behind pages, names, and proof. She exposed corruption, yes, but more than that, Clara left something far more valuable in her wake. An example of quiet strength, of resilience in silence, of defiance in the face of absolute dismissal. She didn't burn the West down. She lit it from within. As dusk fell over the canyon, Clara looked up at the stars, those same stars her mother had once taught her to count. She thought of the fire, the floorboards, the voice she lost, the hand that slipped her a key, and then she asked herself, not with words, but with the stillness inside, would my mother recognize me now? The answer came softly like smoke on a cold wind. Yes, not because she had won a fight, but because she had found her truth. And that was the real treasure buried beneath all this dust. Maybe you've felt voiceless too. Maybe you've been judged by what you lack, rather than what you carry inside. Maybe you've been told you're too small, too broken, too late. But hear this, you don't need a voice to make an impact. You don't need perfect legs to go the distance. And you don't need permission to matter. Clara Mae didn't become a hero because she defeated her enemies. She became one the moment she chose to stop hiding and start believing. Out in the Old West, winds shift, names fade, and many stories get swallowed by dust. But some echoes never die, not because they were the loudest, but because they spoke to something deeper. And Clara's story reminds us, true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to keep going when no one believes you can. Comment, what part of Clara's story moved you most? Was there a moment that felt personal? Share. Send this story to someone who needs to remember their strength today. Subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, resilience, and the forgotten legends of the West. This is Secrets of the West. Because in the end, the Old West wasn't built only by guns and gold. It was built by people like Clara Mae, and maybe people like you.